Hello everyone, and welcome to From the Author's Chair. Today we're reading Chapter 12, Finding a Hunter. And if you're reading along, this is on page 119. She had nothing to offer him, but she'd still try. After all, the shopkeeper had told that lady that he was kind, despite how rough he looked, and helped for a fair price. Yoshiko wasn't sure how much he'd want for helping her, but she knew even just a bit of help would go a long way. She could work towards finding more people another time. For now, the foreign man with autumn hair seemed like the only option. Besides, the shopkeeper had said he was a great hunter, hadn't she? The best in the country, in her mind. And someone who helped people and fixed things. Well, Yoshiko wanted a hunter, someone who could help her hunt traitors, and someone who could help her people and fix a domain. Too much to ask? Probably. Yoshiko set off towards the town when the sun started to set that same night. There was no point in waiting on her own in the caves. They were cold and dark and felt too haunted now. Dressed in the indigo kimono she'd taken from the old farmer's house, and armed with several small blades and throwing blades, she emerged from the underground caverns to the north of the town and crept towards the edge where the foreigner was said to frequent. His home was in a village near the forest to the north of the town, she'd heard. So whenever he came into town, it would be in this area. There were food shops, restaurant stalls, and saké houses, all casual and for the general citizens, but all perfect for someone to spend the evening at. Yoshiko hoped she'd come across him here sooner or later. Yet Yoshiko was surprised by how difficult it was to find a foreigner with hair as red as the autumn leaves. She slipped through the shadows of the northern streets of town for 3 nights without sight or news of this man, and became quite impatient. Yoshiko's only comfort was that she spent her time watching the people she was trying to save. She loved watching and learning about people, so Yoshiko's failure in finding the man became a delight as she watched a fish chef slice cleanly through raw fish, caught that day by fisherfolk. Her stomach growled at the thought of such beautifully soft fish, and she looked away by watching the happy, pink-faced patrons leaving the drink bar. She grinned for the first time in days and marveled at how simple lives could bring such joy. Each night, though, Yoshiko noticed a difference in people's behavior as the night drew on. Shops became eager to shut, and people were hasty to head home. From her hiding places, Yoshiko overheard worried, whispered conversations, and the sounds of heavy items being pushed against doors. Her smile disappeared. On the 4th night, Yoshiko's patience paid off. The autumn hair certainly stood out. She chuckled when she saw a tall, broad man with lightly tanned skin and hair like deep red dying embers stride towards the saké house, tucking his hands casually into the opposite sleeves of his light blue kimono, the pale blue only making his hair look all the redder. He held a deep grey howdy in the crook of his arms, and Yoshiko was amused to see his ankles showing below his kimono, seeing as he was a little taller than the average hien man. All about him, a mass of dark-haired hien people wove around low wooden tables, some greeting him casually by calling out or bowing their heads briefly. The foreigner smiled and bowed his head, good humour and genuine warmth reaching his pale eyes. From this distance, Yoshiko couldn't see the colour, but she marvelled at them. She'd never seen light eyes before. She followed him into the saké house, barely looking where she was going and stumbling into one of the low stools. She growled lightly to herself in frustration at her clumsiness, turning heads and drawing attention, feeling her skin burn with embarrassment. Usually, people would sit on cushions in such an establishment. Yoshiko wondered why these stools were here, and found herself admiring their style. Much later, she'd find out the autumn-haired man made them at the owner's request so that people could sit back more comfortably after a hard day's work. But, at this time, Yoshiko couldn't know, so tried to figure out where they had come from as she bought herself a small earthenware cup of saké to warm her bones and lift her spirits, waiting for the red-haired foreigner to leave. "Well, I'm off." The foreigner's voice sounded low and melodic. Yoshiko focused on her empty cup and tuned her ears in to listen as the saké housekeeper happily thanked the man for visiting again, both agreeing it had been a while since his last visit. Yoshiko was amazed at how well he spoke their language. She scolded herself, wondering what else she was expecting. The man's name, she discovered, was Gora. Whether this was his first or family name, Yoshiko didn't know, but this Gora person seemed friendly with the keeper and his staff and told them to take care. With this, the tone in the keeper's voice changed, and he sounded dark and worried. The red-haired foreigner told the man to shut shop soon. "Something strange about tonight," Gora said, voice low and sounding as if he didn't want to disturb the people happily finishing their drinks. "I can feel it." Yoshiko gestured to a worker that she'd finished her drink, and she was happy to turn her back to the talking pair and tried to make light conversation to thank them for the drink. She hoped it made her look more natural. "You think? It's pretty early. Seems we're just going to have more and more problems if things have to shut up sooner. Business is hard enough with the curfew. You think it'll get worse?" Yoshiko missed Gora's reply, but a nervous laugh from the shopkeeper drew her attention back to them. She watched them from the corner of her eyes as she rose from her seat to make ready to leave. "Soon they'll be making us hide in our homes the minute darkness falls. Who will have any business then?" The shopkeeper was rubbing his rolled-up sleeve nervously, but shrugged and smiled slightly. The red-haired man clapped the keeper on his shoulder. Yoshiko wondered what kind of gesture it was, before both parties bowed and the foreigner left, calling over his shoulder as the other workers thanked him for coming. Taking it as the perfect opportunity to leave and follow, Yoshiko left too, thanking the workers and bowing and ducking under the curtain into the darkness away from the friendly environment within. It had been so warm and lively in there. Her heart wanted to stay. Outside, her mission hit her. The saké had warmed her spirit and lightly numbed her body. She smacked her cheeks lightly and looked about, becoming wary that someone could have tracked her in there and waited for her to leave. None had. But the autumn-haired man had a quick stride, and Yoshiko had to rush to keep up. Careful to keep to the shadows, she followed. Gora swayed slightly as he stumbled in the darkness down the track, zigzagging across the path and swinging his haori around casually. He sang to himself as he walked, a low, mesmerizing sound in a language Yoshiko didn't recognize. The language of his home, she thought. Whether the song was right, she didn't know, but even drunk, it didn't seem wrong. The song seemed sad, though the notes had a strangely jolly and lifting feeling to them, and melodies she'd never heard before filled her ears. It flowed on the wind in a way she felt the Heian music didn't, and made her want to cry and dance and laugh and spin all at once, and watch the waves and the trees and stare at a fire. She was sure, in there, she'd see spirits dancing too. She'd have loved for him to sing at the keep. This man's singing, she realized, could be beautiful, if not for the fact he was drunk and kept stopping or stumbling. His voice had become rough from alcohol, but it was still uplifting enough to listen to. Yoshiko found herself wondering what it was about and whether a song could be both sad and happy at the same time. The song ended with a long, held-on note. Held on as long as he could push the note from his lungs. And then it stopped. Her heart pounded as the man stopped in his tracks with a scuff of his feet on the ground, and Yoshiko kept hidden and silent. He couldn't see her. He wouldn't know she was there. Yet, when he raised his chin towards the sky and sniffed the air, she doubted herself just a moment. What can he smell? She wondered. Her nose was sensitive, and nothing unusual had caught hers. Could he smell her? Yoshiko waited, holding her breath, not allowing herself to twitch even her nose. Eventually, he disappeared into a small wooden stable by the side of the track. Yoshiko waited again and allowed herself to blink. Her mind raced at all the reasons he could be in that stable. But this isn't his home. She thought back to what the shopkeeper had said to the old lady about where the autumn-haired foreigner lived. This wasn't it. There was much further to walk yet. Yet no matter how long she waited, he never came out. A buzz of hot impatience bubbled through her, leaving her feeling inconvenienced and not even knowing why. What would her father say, the man who always taught her to be calm? Feeling more like her wild mother this time, Yoshiko emerged from her hiding place and silently clambered on top of the stable, looking through a crack in the roof to see why the man was hiding, thinking he'd noticed her and hidden in there to attack as she passed. Not today, she thought as she reached the rooftop, and not me. She peered inside. "You're sleeping in here!" Yoshiko couldn't help but call down through the cracks in the wooden roof, baffled. Sure enough, the man with autumn hair had sprawled in the hay and had been snoring loudly beside a brown mare with a look of indifference on her face. Gora leapt up, crying out in shock and pulling himself into a defensive stance, adjusting his loosened kimono. Yoshiko almost giggled at how stupid it was. She'd been so tense that he'd discovered her and hidden to jump out and attack her, and here he was, drooling in the hay. "Where are ya?" His voice had an echoing lilt to it that she couldn't place, like the foreign song he'd been singing, even in the hidden language. "I'll strike if I need to." The man wheeled where he stood, looking for the voice's body. Yoshiko was certain he wouldn't find her, but he was wary nonetheless. "Why were you sleeping here?" The man's thick eyebrows, darker in color than his hair, arched up his forehead, and he continued to scan his surroundings, frowning when he still couldn't locate her. "Why are you hiding now?" he answered with his own question. Yoshiko refused to speak. Fed up with waiting, the man reluctantly responded. "Rough times. Dangerous to be walking so far in the night." He waited for her response, body primed to leap out and hit anything that moved. "It's your turn now." "I don't want to be seen yet," Yoshiko answered carefully, wondering how to phrase it. There was a tense pause while he waited for her explanation. "As you said, rough times." "Fair enough," he growled. Then, narrowing his eyes in thought, he plopped back down in the straw, kicking off his zori, and let out a sigh. Besides, damn comfy this. Yoshiko wasn't sure he was talking to her at this point, though he'd spoken in his zen. Still, she didn't know what to say back. So, he continued for her instead. "Why are you following me? What's so important that you came out in the dark in rough times as these? No one should be walking alone, least of all a young lass." "Why were you pretending to be drunk?" Yoshiko shifted where she was perched on the roof and dared to get a little more comfortable. "Huh?" He looked upwards, eyes watching the roof warily. She scolded herself for being careless. "You noticed? People underestimate you then. If there's a problem, I can look after myself, or someone else." With that last bit, Yoshiko thought of the shopkeeper and what she'd said about him being kind. From the outside, he seemed careless and rough, and half drunk, he even acted it. But she wondered if he wouldn't be a bad person to work with, after all, if the drinking wasn't too much of a habit. You couldn't predict someone who drank a lot. "You should try remembering that." He grinned easily and covered his pale eyes with his light blue sleeve, making as if he wanted to sleep. "Remember what? Acting drunk makes people underestimate you. You get away with a lot. Might come in handy." Yoshiko thought about that. It wasn't like anything Chinen or her mother had taught her, but from watching him earlier, she believed him. "So, you want to speak? Be quick. I want to sleep." Suddenly feeling off guard, Yoshiko wondered how she'd even go about asking it. In her mind, she imagined sneaking up to him, catching him off guard, and impressing him with her shadow skills. Then, just like her mother, she'd have given some impressive speech to convince him to work with her to save their region. Now she was here, Yoshiko felt awkward, and not like that at all. She started, looking at his half-covered face. He already looked asleep. She wondered whether he'd even hear her now. Gora grunted something from below, indicating for her to continue. "I need your help," she admitted. It wasn't smooth or persuasive, and her mother would probably be staring at her with a look of disbelief from the spirit world. "I heard you were a skilled hunter and tracker, and were good at all kinds of jobs, with a good eye and ear for things," she gushed. "There's something I need to do, and I can't do it alone." Yoshiko waited, the world about her silent. Not even wind shook the trees. She shivered. The night felt so open, and she felt so suddenly vulnerable up here. It was time to leave. "Where'd you hear I was good?" the autumn-haired man said eventually, voice soft and hard to hear. "A shopkeeper?" Yoshiko didn't want to admit she'd been eavesdropping. He grunted and turned his head to the side, but he kept his eyes covered with his arm. "Why should I? Got my own things to do." There it was, the point Yoshiko had been struggling to figure out a reason for. She still didn't have much of a convincing answer. "I heard you were kind and took good care of people. People are getting hurt, and they're frightened. This curfew and the brutality of the guards are causing a problem." Yoshiko thought back to everything she'd seen and heard, and somehow words spilled from her mouth. She didn't know if it was the right answer, though. "I'm sure it's a pain even for you, making things difficult. You're unable to return to your home safely. This isn't the here I was raised in. This isn't the life I was taught about." Yoshiko thought back to what Haruki told her of life in the town, and how this didn't match up with what her maid had said. She had to fix it, and she had to find Haruki and make here a better place to live again. Then she could return to the palace and find a way to punish the traitors on the council who started this all. "It's a problem and a fucking pain for sure, but I'm not sure how I can help with that. This sort of thing starts from the top. There ain't much us at the bottom can do." The arm that covered his eyes struck out at the straw in frustration, and the poor mare next to him startled. He leapt up to calm her, hushing and humming at her. "As you say," Yoshiko said, thinking. "It starts at the top." She took a risk. "Hear me out. Meet me tomorrow to speak properly. We can talk at a more decent time. I'll give you time to think it through." Gora grunted and plonked himself back in the straw once the mare had calmed. "Fine," he growled. "I'll hear you out. Where do you want me to go?" Yoshiko told him about a stone wall behind a plum tree in the eastern public garden. He was to go there, alone, and head between the gap when no one was looking. From there, he'd see a place to move the wall aside. "It's surprisingly light," she told him. "Go inside the opening and close it behind you. I'll leave a lantern for you. Just follow the passageway." Gora said something in a low voice, something in the language she didn't understand, the same one from the song. But she ignored it. Eventually, he agreed. Then, before he could change his mind, she leapt from the roof and sprinted into the trees on the other side of the track. She waited, hiding, certain he'd try to see. Sure enough, she heard scrambling and saw the red-haired man throw open the stable door and scan the track. Seeing nothing, he frowned, rubbed a hand through his fiery hair, and disappeared back inside. The last thing Yoshiko heard before she slipped away to make her way back to the caverns was the crashing of a large, heavy body into the straw as the man gave up for the night and fell asleep.